data we have from Utah and Wyoming shows that even in areas with no traffic flow and where the baseline is pristine air quality, that hydrofracking alone can create ozone levels that are above legal attainment. Now, ozone is not a chemical that's generated by diesel trucks or by the wellheads. Rather, ozone is a triangle of oxygens that's created when volatile organic compounds, which are wafted up from the wellheads, such as toluene, benzene, and xylenes, mix with the nitrous oxides from the diesel exhaust from the compressors and the generators in the trucks. And so when sunlight hits these things, a chemical reaction happens and you get ozone. Now, ozone is a powerful cellular poison, and it's linked to inflammation. It's not a carcinogen, but it appears to make metastases to lungs more likely. So in other words, if you have breast cancer, let's say, and you're breathing a lot of lung air pollution, your lungs are inflamed in such a way that errant cancer cells are more likely to set up shop there and form a metastasis. Ozone also stunts lung development in children, in addition to triggering asthma. So when you're exposed to ozone in either in infancy or in early childhood, while your lungs are still developing, you actually grow a smaller set of lungs than if you would otherwise. And research in some of our major cities shows that this can actually interfere with, let's say, athletic performance in adolescence. So you end up growing a smaller set of lungs, and that can compromise your respiratory ability for life. So these are the things that we're now worried about with Wyoming and Utah's air in places where we had no air quality problems. By contrast, we have ozone alerts every summer here in upstate New York. So we're not starting with the baseline of pristine air. We have, we're at the tailpipe end of some of the coal-burning power plants in the Ohio Valley. We have a lot of traffic, and so we already struggle with air attainment standards. And so the kind of density of fracking that would come, which is pretty much required because the bubbles of gas under the shale are so dispersed that to do fracking, it's kind of a shock and awe operation. You have to have a lot of wells, and all of these require 1,000 different trucks. And so the air pollution is going to be an inevitable consequence. We know that you can measure diesel exhaust in umbilical cord blood, and some of the best research that we have coming out of Columbia University shows us that the higher the levels of diesel exhaust exposure prenatally, the higher the risk for preterm birth, which is the leading cause of disability in this nation, and the higher the risk for cognitive deficits. So given that we already spend a quarter of our public school dollars on special education, why would we invite to New York a form of extreme energy extraction that extinguishes the IQ points of our children and simply adds a burden to our educational schools and to our medical systems at a time when we are struggling as a state so much financially that we've just had to cut medical and education in the state of New York, rather than increasing the need for more medicine and the need for more special ed. If we invest in the kinds of sustainable economic development that would clean up our air and rely on renewables, then we would have less need for public education and special ed. We'd have less need for emergency room visits for asthmatic children.
You mentioned Wyoming. Was there not a study that was released recently indicating that the air quality in parts of Wyoming is comparable in terms of ozone to that of Los Angeles and
That's
attributable
right.
to drilling?
That's right, because they're in that part of Wyoming, there's no other industrial activity. There are not a lot of highways, and so what began as some of the most pristine air in the nation, after shale gas extraction came to that community, the amounts of ozone in the air were comparable to what we see in some of our highly polluted cities, such as Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, we've already done the studies showing that children who breathe ozone at those levels have health effects. So we can predict that in Wyoming, we will see some of the health effects in those children that we have already documented in Los Angeles. My concern as a biologist for the children of New York is that we would achieve ozone unattainment far more rapidly than even Wyoming because we've already got ozone problems already. And these are very expensive problems to solve. And as the mother of an asthmatic child myself, I can tell you that it's a very parent-intensive experience to have a child who can't breathe. I myself was offered a position, a wonderful job, heading up a graduate program at Iowa State University. And when I went out to do the interview, because of my son, I had to read the data on the local air quality data there. I was surprised to discover that Ames, Iowa actually has serious air quality problems because of an old municipal waste incinerator that also serves as that city's power generator. There's also a coal-burning power plant on campus. So that when I did my interview there, and my husband was actually also offered a job there, we brought our family out to look into buying a house. And while I was there, my son began to have asthmatic symptoms. So I came back to Ithaca, New York, and when his symptoms disappeared and he could breathe again, I went down to Cayuga Lake near where I live. I looked out over this beautiful landscape where I live, and I said to myself, no amount of retirement benefits and academic prestige makes up for my child not being able to breathe. So I turned down that job and embedded my roots here in upstate New York, only to now be faced with surrounded by land that's all leased to the gas drillers. And it's only the moratorium that the Assembly and that the governor has provided me as a mother that stands between me and respiratory harm to my child. Already I've seen my neighbors talking about leaving the area. I receive many from my own readers. I receive emails saying if fracking is coming, maybe I won't retire in Ithaca after all. Maybe we should leave before we can't, my buyer can't get a mortgage for the house. And so I see signs already of an exodus from upstate New York. Surely good people leaving and with all of their tax dollars and their willingness to pay for schools, it cannot be part of sustainable economic growth in upstate New York.
Why do you think we know so little about the health impacts of methane?
Because methane has never been a big issue in water before. So there's been no need to study it. We don't know of large numbers of people don't drink high amounts of methane in water. Methane is not sort of a natural contaminant of water. It only comes when you do something, you disturb the subterranean landscape in such a way that it's released from those geological strata. So we've seen it in some cases associated with coal, but the widespread hydrofracking would raises the possibility that we would bring methane to drinking water, not just of a few wells here and there, but methane in our public drinking water, which unlike private wells is chlorinated. And so we have, as far as I know, there's no data on what happens to methane and chlorine when they're mixed together. As a biologist, I intend to seek out this information. I wrote a lot in my book, Living Downstream, about disinfection byproducts because they are linked to bladder and colon cancers. And the EPA has moved to lower trihalomethanes, recognizing they're a much bigger threat to human cancer than previously appreciated. And so this has created already a problem in Ithaca to bring our trihalomethanes to lower those levels because you don't, of course, want to raise the risk of exposing people to communicable diseases by not chlorinating the water sufficiently. But the more carbon you add to water, when you do chlorinate it, the more trihalomethanes you get. So I have no data to offer you about what happens when methane and chlorine combine. That's a topic I plan to seek out. But surely, until we have an answer to that question, maybe we should hit the pause button here.
Do you expect that the EPA study due out sometime next year will address any of these issues? I was very distressed that the EPA study, which originally was supposed to consider the health effects caused by air pollution, has now decided not to investigate air. Because that is, we have more data on that, we can make better predictions on that. And surely it would help us, if we looked at air, it would help us understand, okay, methane extraction offers us this amount of economic development, but if the cost to human health is considerable, then suddenly that doesn't look like such a good investment after all. I would like to have those numbers. How many more asthma cases? How many more bladder and colon cancer cases? How many more breast cancer cases? How many more preterm births caused by predictions about the degradation of our air? Also, this is an issue for New York City because New York City, like Los Angeles, has a lot of emissions. The reason New York City isn't in the situation that Los Angeles is in because it's not surrounded by mountains, so that the fresh, clean air of upstate New York blows through New York City and pushes all those emissions out to sea. What happens if we degrade our upstate air
to resemble New York City air, will the city of New York itself then get no relief from its own ozone emissions and so forth? So these are huge issues that the EPA study is not going to be addressing. I do hope the EPA study will shed some light on groundwater, although, again, it's not comprehensive. So, for example, the Marcellus Shale is quite radioactive. This represents elements left over from these ancient mountains that used to be where the Catskills are now. When those mountains eroded into the shallow sea of which once covered this area, those elements, including uranium and strontium and other radioactive isotopes, bound themselves up together with the shale and those bubbles of methane, which represent the dead bodies of all the creatures that lived in this ocean. And when you shatter it and bring those bubbles up, you also bring up radioactive isotopes with the flowback fluid and with the cutting muds, which are being dumped in various places. And so the dumping of the hazardous waste created from hydrofracking, which is not classified as hazardous waste, but certainly is, my knowledge is that that's not a focus of the EPA study, but that omission also concerns me. So there's the EPA study will, I think, offer us some good information about what risks we might be, our groundwater might be faced with, but there are other risks that I'm equally concerned about that are outside the focus of that study.
Well, you mentioned the need for additional studies. So what should those studies be, and could you prioritize them?
I would certainly prioritize the study of where the hazardous waste is going. We know that some of it's going into our landfills, and we know that, for example, right now, toxic flowback from wells in Pennsylvania are heading up Route 13 and being dumped in the New York City of Auburn. And there are downstream communities that are being impacted. So we need study of those things. I'm also very interested in what happens to New York's dairy industry, which is, I think, highly vulnerable. We're a big dairy state. It's a $2 billion industry. And cow's milk bioaccumulates, especially radioactive isotopes, along with some of the other heavy metals that are found in frac fluid. So when you've got wells going up on pasture near where cows are grazing, how does that work? I mean, if all that would have to happen is, one study 10 years from now showing that our milk is radioactive, and who's going to trust the milk from New York cows? And so I think and we've already seen from the disaster in Japan that radiation from Japan has made it all the way to cow's milk in Vermont. So the dumping of radioactive waste products in our landfills, possibly spills that affect pasture land and organic dairies in New York. As a mom of children who relies on organic milk that I buy from my local farmers, I have concern about that.
Thank you.
Hydrofracking gas drilling has been going on in parts of New York State for decades, as I understand it. If I'm correct, it has been essentially vertical drilling, and what is contemplated now, I gather, is drilling that would go down and then for great distances horizontally. Are the issues that you have raised applicable as much to the longstanding practice of vertical drilling as well as the horizontal? Is it a difference? If there are differences, is it just differences of scale or of substance as well?
It's both. The differences of scale would mean that vertical drilling, which of course began here in New York State in the 19th century, we were the first state to do, drill for natural gas, that relied on natural gas that was generated and moved through geological strata and got trapped in big bubbles. So we could kind of put a straw straight down and up came the gas. So that was sort of our grandparents' gas drills. Now we've run through most of that gas. So to get gas out of shale where it's dispersed as a kind of petrified fizz of champagne bubbles, if you will, the horizontal drilling proposes to go down and then turn the drill sideways and go about a mile or so and then detonate with explosives that shale and then force under very high pressure chemicalized water to release the bubbles. And so the chemicals that are used in horizontal hydrofracking are different from what was used in previous kinds of drilling, even drills that relied on fracturing. So we are introducing new chemicals to New York that haven't been used before in drilling, so that is a novel thing. But the cumulative impacts part of my message is that because each one of these wells isn't going to hit this kind of gold mine of gas, it relies on little bubbles coming out here and there. It's the density of wells that's going to be very different. We will industrialize the entire landscape. In 77,000 wells, each well pad several acres big. We're fragmenting habitat, we're compressing soil, we raise the risk for flood control, problems. And of course, there are many other public health problems that I'm concerned about that I haven't addressed. One of them is light at night, which we now have evidence is linked to breast cancer. And of course, noise pollution, which is considerable with fracking. There's some new data out of Europe showing that this is more than just a nuisance. It's actually related to stroke and cardiac risk. And hearing loss and things like that. So there are many public health problems that come with horizontal hydrofracking that we have not seen so far with vertical drilling. That being said, I am alarmed at the amount of vertical drilling that's going on in the southern tier even now, and I'm hearing anecdotes from people who live there that their well water is being affected by vertical drilling. Now, what I learned in graduate school is that the plural of anecdote is not data, right? So I don't know as a biologist whether or not vertical drilling is posing serious risks to our water, but I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone's looking at this, and again, that needs to be looked at very closely.
Thank you.
Did I turn it on? It's on, okay. Thank you for your testimony. I just have a short question. In terms, one thing that caught my eye, and I'm familiar with this, the fact that I guess you could say the Clean Water Act, that the hydrofracking fluids are so-called exempted from that. And I wanted to focus on the air pollution concerns that you had brought up, because one thing that I have been reading of late is the quantification of the air quality problem, that it hasn't really been focused on. And I'm wondering, is there a possibility, or should there be a possibility, of future modeling of quantifying the air quality impacts? Because you had said now that you're able to get a finger, a pulse, if you will, on that. Is that something that should be considered? And then I'll get to my next question.
Yeah, I think it should be, and I think it could be, because there are new tools through what's now being called cumulative impact assessment that would allow us to do that. And I would encourage an approach that would include the emissions that we're already getting from Pennsylvania, right? So, for example, last summer we had more ozone alert days in Tompkins County, New York than I have ever seen in all the years that I have lived here. Is that because of ozone coming up from 60 miles south where fracking is going on at a breakneck speed? As far as I know, no one is looking into that. So our air quality may already be affected by what's happening just across the border in Pennsylvania. We need to know that before we decide to bring 77,000 wells to New York, because the cumulative impact is not just from the wells in New York, but because of the way the prevailing wind blows from the southwest, the wind follows the kind of Appalachian Mountains. All the fracking air pollutants from Pennsylvania are also being inhaled by all of us here in New York.
Well, that gets back to your other statement with regard to the Clean Water Act. And talking about the Clean Air Act, we have responsibilities to meet thresholds because of mandates, if you will, of the federal government. And we're responsible for state implementation plans. And I'm wondering, how will that affect our future modeling, if you will, to meet the Clean Water Act, which is a mandate that each state in the country has to follow? And is there any thought that you have in terms of, you think there could be exemptions to the Clean Water Act? Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't.
That would be pretty scary,
I mean,
but-
I think the federal statutes on the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, these are good laws. They certainly allow those of us in the research community to design studies. So the Safe Drinking Water Act would require the identity of chemicals used in fracking. Right now we don't have that. So people like me can't answer questions from the public like, well, could these symptoms, be related to what's in my water? We don't even know what to test for in the water because we don't know what chemicals were used. So the secrecy that surrounds fracking kind of puts a veil of silence and secrecy around the process, and it doesn't allow the science to go forward, if nothing else. And of course, as a bladder cancer patient, I have another perspective on all this. This jar of water I actually drank from recently. My last checkup was abnormal. And so my urologist asked me to come in for some more scans, and I was required to drink a whole quart of water before having the scan. So out of this jar, I drank the quart of water and went in and then watched the interior of my body, like a Nova show special up on the big screen, and I'm still waiting for the results of those pathology reports. Later on that same day, after I took the backless blue cotton gown off, I still had my jar of water with me. I went to the Cornell Law School and entered into a debate with a member of the gas industry over the issue of hydrofracking. And I talked to him about my experience this morning with this water and the fact that it already contains, that people like me have higher vulnerability than the general population and perhaps need more protection from drinking water contaminants, and who is looking out for my rights as a bladder cancer patient, and who is looking out for my children for whom this becomes their blood plasma. And the response I got was that from the other panel members was that our energy policy needed to be based on science, not on emotion. And so I find frustrating the call to look first before we take action as an emotional call. In fact, the precautionary principle is an honest scientific response, because it's an admission by the scientific community that we don't know everything about the underlying geology of the world we walk in, and we therefore have to be careful. I had the opportunity to talk about cancer and the environment to the European Union in December at the European Parliament, and talked about fracking in that forum, and I found that members of Parliament there were far more likely to understand that precaution should come first and the science should come next, and then action is the last thing to happen. On this side of the Atlantic, it seems that action happens first, and then our science is always trying to play catch-up for these unintended human experiments that we create, sometimes with devastating consequences.
Well, just wanted to, in conclusion to what you've said, we are, I believe, New York State, am I right, is a non-attainment state in terms of our the Clean Air Act, that we have to make compensation. And as a legislator, we're always looking for solutions to be able, because a lot of times it's financial. In order to get federal aid, we have to show progress. And so, too, we went after congestion pricing when I first got here in the Assembly to become an attainment state, if you will. And that was roundly defeated. I supported congestion pricing. So, ironically, as we look to solutions to mitigate our air quality, that balance has to be there, as you had so wonderfully put forth, the unintended consequences. Are we going to be back here a few years later figuring out means like congestion pricing to offset the impacts of legislation we had done prior to, because we have mandates that we have to follow from the federal government with regards to water, and in this case, the Clean Air Act?
Well, that's very true. And the American Lung Association has done a wonderful job compiling the data that we do have available on our non-attainment areas. And so their brand new report is available now online. It's interactive. So you can click on the icon showing New York and read everything about all the metrics we have available to us now about our air quality in terms of particulates, in terms of ozone, and so forth, and realizing that that will be our baseline, on top of which we will add these other things. And we should be able to model this. You know, what will happen when these when all these fleets of 18-wheelers come in and things like that. On the ground, as a person who lives in a community that's surrounded by leased land, what I'm hearing is, not conversations about ozone, but I'm hearing, as the mother of a 12-year-old daughter, conversations, with other soccer moms to the effect of, wait a minute, I'm supposed to teach my teenage children how to drive on rural roads in icy weather with 18-wheelers hauling hazmat? How does that work? So that's those kind of light bulbs going on above people's heads, because we're already seeing frack trucks as they move up to Auburn carrying waste. Our roads are already being congested, and people are thinking of leaving. I mean, I really want to give you that message strongly. And these are good people with PhDs, and they have the money and the resources to go elsewhere. They've chosen to live in upstate New York because of the quality of life that it offers. It's a good place to raise children. It has clean air and clean water. It has culture, it has nature, it has organic food. It's a wonderful place to raise a family. But there are other wonderful places that don't involve the Marcellus Shale. And there will be many people who become environmental refugees and simply choose to leave.
Thank you.
I have promised this farmer I would deliver his testimony, so I'm going to keep my promise.
I hope he's not a registered lobbyist, because then we can't accept the bread.
Dr.
This is
Stein,
going to distract us for the rest of the day, you know.
It's 2-day-old bread. I've been on the road for a while.
Dr. Steingrabber, the part of your testimony that really caught my attention centered on your statement regarding methane in drinking water. And you referenced the paper by Osborne and others, the researchers at Duke University. I read that paper recently. It rocked me backwards. I found it to be a meaningful contribution and one of the first efforts made by reputable scientists to look at the question that you rightly raised about the impact of methane in drinking water. And you have indicated that methane, when in water and then chlorinated, can create problems. And I
don't actually know it can. I raise it as a question. Can it?
You raised it as a question. The Osborne study, you point out here, on average, there is an indication that methane occurs on average 17 times more frequently than in non-drilling neighborhoods. If I remember correctly, it's up to more than 60 times. So the 17 is an understatement.
That's right.
And this, it seems to me, is a meaningful area of investigation. I have a question. There's a common daily activity that most homemakers do, which is they wash their clothes, and they use bleach. And we've seen, in recent films done on this, that very often there's a lot of methane in tap water. Do you see the possibility that simply washing one's clothes in a neighborhood that is subjected to a lot of drilling may expose, may cause this potential pathway of the creation of trihalomethanes?
Well, that's an excellent question, and there's one could write a dissertation on that topic. I don't think we have an answer for that. And again, it's one of many unanswered questions. I would hate for us to shatter the bedrock under our feet, bringing methane up into our drinking water, only to find out 10 to 20 years from now that it is a health hazard, or that it does combine with bleach or detergent or chlorine to create something hazardous. Science simply has no answers for us. I was distressed to see that as a result of the publication of the Duke study, which is one of two now, only two scientific studies on hydrofracking published in the peer-reviewed medical literature, the other being the study that shows that hydrofracking has a carbon footprint at least on par with burning coal and maybe worse, that was published recently by my colleague Tony Angrafia and Bob Howarth at Cornell University. So that paper and this paper from the Duke team on methane are the only two scientific papers we have. And the Howarth and Graffia paper, the authors clearly admit that the data that the industry itself provided them was poor, but they did the best they can with it, and there are many unanswered questions. The Duke team intended the study to be a pilot project as a hypothesis-generating exercise. What it did show to us is that the methane in the water of the people's wells, we know that it's thermogenic methane, meaning it actually comes up from the Marcellus because they were able to do molecular fingerprinting, so it's not methane from some other surface source. So that was the kind of the brilliant experimental design that study offers to us. But it's easy for me as a scientist to call for more research, and of course we do need more research. But let's do the research first and keep people out of harm's way until we get the results of that research. So the biologist in me wants to see more and better data. The mother in me and the cancer patient in me wants to keep us safe while that data is being generated.
I think your caution regarding the proper sequence is very, very important, and I hope we all remember precaution first, science next, then action. That's the proper sequence. Thank you for that wonderful thought, and thank you for your wonderful testimony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor.